Okay, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary Mond. I'm Chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. And in tonight's session, we're very honoured to have two exceptionally experienced speakers talking about anti-Semitism and the BBC. Later in the evening, we'll be hearing from David Collier, who is probably Britain's most successful campaigner against anti-Semitism and very well known and respected in the UK Jewish community. Before then, however, we're honoured to have speaking to us from Jerusalem, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sharren Haskel, MK. And I'm going to reintroduce Sharren now, and she will speak first, probably for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then there'll be time for questions for Sharren. And then after that, David will speak, and there'll be then questions for David. Before I introduce Sharren, I just want to remind you we have another event tomorrow evening. It's a face-to-face in-person event at Stanmore and Cannons Park Synagogue, where the speakers are Natasha Hausdorff from UK Lawyers for Israel and Anne Hertzberg from the NGO Monitor.
Wow.
Another date for your diary is the 11th of May, when we have our anti-Semitism conference at South Hampstead Synagogue. We'll be telling you much more about that nearer the time. And our dates for our next trip to Israel are the 1st to the 4th of September. Now, let me introduce Sharren. Sharren was born in Canada to a Moroccan mother and an Israeli father. She's lived in Israel ever since she was 1 year old when her family moved there. Her career has been very varied and successful. She started off as a combat soldier, then became a veterinary nurse, and then went on to become the youngest member of the Knesset, where she's currently serving as the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Sharren has emerged as one of Israel's most vocal critics of the BBC. And I have to say, from a UK perspective, it is fantastic that members of the Knesset are prepared, and senior members of the Knesset are prepared to directly criticise the BBC. And she's raised serious concerns about the corporation's reporting on the conflict since the 7th of October 2023. Sharren has launched a scathing attack on the BBC, accusing the broadcaster of making at least 80 severely damaging errors in its coverage of Israel that she believes were not merely mistakes, but deliberate. And more recently, Sharren has led calls for the police to investigate the monies that have been paid to the family of the 14-year-old son of a Hamas official who narrated the BBC documentary titled Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. We're very honoured to have Sharren with us this evening. Sharren, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's a great honor to be here tonight and to speak to all of you. It's a great pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. So about a month ago, I actually wrote a 1,200-word piece for the Daily Mail, specifically talking about the BBC and how they managed some of their media during the last year and a half. I think that through the years, I've been in Parliament for the last 10 years. I've had a lot of confrontations with the BBC. I never backed down from an interview with the BBC because I understand how important that voice is throughout the international community worldwide. But I have to say that the vast majority of my interviews were very hard, to say the least, with many facts that are not real, that are distorted, to actually try and tackle and explain the true story or what the facts really are. I think also many times being canceled some interviews because of my positions as well. But I think that the last year and a half was an absolute outrage. Since the beginning of the war, the BBC have put reports and claims where some of them were completely baseless. One of the incidents where the IDF actually took a notification out to foreign reporters telling them that the IDF just entered one of the hospitals with medical staff to make sure that we can evacuate the patients from the hospital in a proper manner with medical treatment. And they actually reported, a complete fabrication of the Israeli forces coming in, shooting medical staff. I mean, that was one of the top events for me that made me really realize how the BBC is not just being manipulated, but might actually have an agenda behind its reporting. And that's why I know, and I stated that in the article as well, 80 mistakes are not mistakes. I'm absolutely certain that that's already, so it's a pattern, it's a system, okay? People don't do just mistake like that. When you do a mistake, then you make sure that next time you check your sources. But time after time, one of the biggest problem is that those outlets are relying on Hamas propaganda, pure Hamas propaganda. And try and imagine that. I mean, try and imagine like all the CNN, Sky News, BBC reports from the Afghanistan war were from Al Qaeda. And they were using their numbers and their stories. Obviously, you cannot rely on a terrorist organization. You have to take everything they give you, not with a grain of salt, but with a shovel of salt. You have to check those facts. You have to back them out, but they're not doing that work. And when the BBC came with that propaganda film, How to Survive a War, the foreign ministry went into drive mode. Obviously with David Collier, who's been brilliantly uncovering a lot of the facts behind it, and I've been following that also up closely, revealing also the fact that 3 of these children are associated with Hamas. One of them is the son of a deputy minister of Hamas, the other one a commander, the other one many pictures of him posing with Hamas terrorists. And when we saw that, we went into drive mode as well at the foreign ministry to make sure someone's accountable for the propaganda, Hamas propaganda that's being spread everywhere. And so the fact is they took down that propaganda movie, but that's not enough. Someone has to take responsibility for that. And that's why I've also called for a police investigation. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's a prescribed terrorist organizations in the UK, meaning someone funneled probably £400,000 into this movie, meaning some of this money ended up in the hands of Hamas. When they are using 3 children, someone must have paid them. Okay? They are not receiving those funds. Most likely their parents are receiving these funds. And so this money probably ended in the hands of Hamas, meaning the BBC transferred taxpayers' money into the hands of a terrorist organization. This is a criminal offense. We cannot look to the side. I mean, I'm not even talking about the 80 mistakes. I'm not even talking about the damage to the reputation of our country because they are using propaganda and unreliable sources. But this is a deliberate a propaganda film who's aimed to harm Israel and paid. The money went into the pockets of terrorists in a prescribed terrorist organization. And unfortunately, as far as I hear right now, the police doesn't have any answers. And so I called up also for an Ofcom investigation as well to be um, uh, dealt with. Um, and what was really funny to me, or I mean, it's very sad, but we don't have any other choice but to laugh about it. Ofcom actually gave them permission to commit their own private investigation in the BBC. Now, that's a joke. I think, when it's suited Ofcom to do proper investigation into propaganda, into channels that weren't impartial, that weren't balanced, they did it. Matter of fact, they've actually blocked the channel RT from broadcasting in the UK because of those circumstances. And when the BBC create a criminal offense, allegedly, okay, we don't know yet, it needs to be investigated by the police, of funneling money into the hands of terrorists, having so much evidence that they're not impartial, this is just letting them off the hook. And this is something that the British citizen should really raise their voice about, because it comes out of their money. I think that, first of all, the Arab channel have really, really, really spread complete lies, propaganda, put out the pro-Palestinian viewpoint time after time. Their sources come from Gaza, specifically from Hamas. This has been really extremely bad. But most of our efforts right now are going towards the English channels, as this is being broadcast also all around the world and is creating the most damage to our reputation. I think that many people don't understand the wider context as well. Israel is not fighting a territorial war, okay? This is a war on values. This is a religious war. This is Israel and its value of democracy, equality, women's rights, freedom of speech, fighting against radical jihadists led by Iran, which sent all its tentacles all around the world. Israel's fighting on 7 fronts since the 8th of October. Why did Hezbollah shoot rockets, murdering and destroying homes in Israel, from Syria, from Yemen, from Iraq, directly from Iran? On the 8th of October, there wasn't a single soldier in Gaza. It took us 3 weeks to set operations. And it's very clear. This is the war of jihad. This is a war, a religious war, a war on our values. And in this war, we don't just fight in the front line, those terrorist organizations, but they have a strategic outlined war that they are fighting in the media and in social media on the hearts and minds of the entire world, using many people, organizations, channels as tools in their war. It goes from Iran, but it also goes through the Muslim Brotherhood, trying to spread those values of jihad. Al Jazeera is the mouthpiece of the Muslim Brotherhood with complete fabrications. And so that kind of attitude, that kind of message has been spread through mainstream media as well, taking reports from there, taking information, baseless information from these outlets. And so, it's very interesting. I'm not going to go too much in depth because that's going to take a long time. But in Washington, just in the late 90s, The FBI seized many documents that were the base for the trials of the Holy Land Foundation trials. And in these documents that they actually seized, there's an outline of a strategic plan of the Muslim Brotherhood on how to infiltrate Sharia into the American society. And they talk about the media, they talk about social media, they talk about civil society organizations, they talk about campuses. But you know, I think that many people do not understand that part of their strategy is to push those views and those beliefs through the media. And unfortunately, I think that what we see in the BBC are the consequences partially of that as well, that are being spread all around the world. So Gary, I'll stop here, and if there's also after any questions or anything like that, I'm more than happy. I'll stay here online.
Thank you, Sharren. Thank you so much for that. Can I just ask people to raise their virtual hands? That means you go to the react button at the bottom of the screen, you click on it, and then you raise where it says raise hand, click on that. While I'm waiting for people to raise their hands, I'll just ask a couple of questions myself. The first is the Jewish community in the UK tends to be divided on a lot of issues. There's a relative degree of unanimity as to the problems with the BBC and the immense anti-Semitic, anti-Israel bias that we witness. Yet where there is no unanimity in the Jewish community, or not much, is what we should actually do about it. So I would like you to give us your advice as to what we as Jews in the UK should be doing about BBC anti-Semitism.
So the first thing, I think that there needs to be a clear call for an Ofcom investigation or an outsourcing to an independent media organization, a neutral one, or a think tank or research center about the media that will investigate, in depth what is really happening in the BBC. I think that the Jewish community also needs to demand from the authorities, from the police, an in-depth investigation whether funds were paid to Hamas. Because I think there has to be a red line that needs to be drawn. And the red line goes, first of all, when you fund a terrorist organization. That's already too far. And the second one is to start raising a voice about, really having the principle of impartiality in the media and how important it really is. I'm not even going in on how to fight anti-Semitism and the spread of anti-Semitism, but I think specifically in that has to be across the line. I know that also the Board of Deputies also had a report about a series of actions that should be taken. I read it. I think there's some good recommendations there, but overall, I think those two principle are something that the entire Jewish community can stand behind it.
Thank you, Sham. Delighted to see there are so many questions. So, Evelyn Sassoon, you were first. If you could possibly turn your camera on, that would be lovely. And please ask a question and unmute yourself. Evelyn. No, you're not there. Okay, Richard Cafton, you're next. Richard,
okay. That's
yourself and ask your question, Richard.
what happened there.
Good evening, everybody. And Sharren, thank you very much for your comments. I think, unfortunately, the problem is you're preaching to the converted with regard to the BBC, Sky, and CNN. Had it not been for David Collier, nothing would have been done about the recent outrage. Where was the outrage from the Israeli government spokesman at the time, somebody like yourself, the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies, and even the Chief Rabbi? Today, Sky News led first thing on the morning on its news about the deaths of the paramedics in Gaza. I've got no idea what happened there, but I've heard nothing at all from the Israeli government. So it's very important that we in the UK do our own thing to have a go at the BBC and Sky and all of these other biased organisations. But you need to lead us with this. And unfortunately, the Jewish leadership in this country is also doing precious little.
Thanks,
so
Richard.
where do we go from here?
Now, Sharon,
I
answer the
know,
question.
Richard, thank you so much for this question. I think it's really important. But I think you mainly need to understand the forces that are actually there. When the BBC documentary came out, first of all, we've acted, including our embassy, including the foreign ministry, sending letters, and we've made phone calls to the authorities, to the representatives as well, in order to demand that. I've made personally 3 interviews at least on TV and on the BBC, about, I think, 4 of them on the radio. And I wrote an article, a 1,200-word piece at the Daily Mail, so that I don't preach to the choir, but I actually get that message out. Unfortunately, many of the outlets will not put me on. Okay? They prefer to invite the pro-Palestinians and some, even that voice of Israeli critics. Okay? I've had on the BBC a few interviews canceled. I can only assume why they were canceled on the television, but they were. And so for us in Israel, it's not easy to go and get those interviews and to do that. I think that the embassy and the spokesperson at the embassy is pushing very hard and is doing good work. But our sources are limited, and there's also not a great will of hearing and listening to our message. As I gave you an example before as well, sometimes when we get out our statement, they are being completely distorted and they are being broadcast from the exact opposite from what we're actually doing. The IDF actually put through a statement after this event as well. No one would broadcast that. They broadcasting Hamas statement, but not the Israeli statements. And I think that's a lot to do with the position of those reporters. And that's why I think there has to be an investigation about impartiality, because when you read the statement of Hamas, but you refuse to read the statement of the IDF, you might have a political agenda behind it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nicholas Lazarus, if you unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. Hello. First of all, when I worked for the BBC, you'd be fired for that great omission. First of all, you'd be fired, right? So, and the typical BBC are looking outwards. They're blaming the producers. It's the BBC's responsibility. They commission the program and they have commissioning guidelines and they weren't adhered to. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, I do disagree with the previous questioner. I don't think it's down to the Israeli government. It'd be good to have the support of the Israeli government, but I think it's got to come from here. And we all have a voice. We all have local MPs. And I think if we all got together, if we all started to do that, I'm fed up of hearing people saying we're scared and we're not listened to, because we're not talking, we're not airing, we are a bit weak like that. We're a bit disorganized, and there are various different organizations. People are unsure what to do. Call CST or call the Board of Deputies. So I think there's a lot of confusion. But as a person, as a voter, you can first of all go to your MP and get them to either raise a question or raise a query or question the Home Office, or raise a complaint through the Home Office, as it's the BBC. And on BBC reporting, I mean, Jeremy Bowen has been hauled over the coals before. In fact, it was raised by the Guardian newspaper, of all newspapers, in 2014, of the biasness of his reporting, and he was hauled over the coals, and he's still in post. Again, that's something which should have been looked into more, and more action should have been taken. And I'm sorry to keep taking more. I mentioned on the chat the Balin report, the very the infamous but not so infamous Balaam report, which was an internal investigation conducted by the BBC into anti-Semitism. I think it was in 2012, has not been published because my colleagues, my ex-colleagues at the BBC, tell me it's extremely damning. Again, it's up to us to go to our MPs and ask for that report to be published. And the reason why it hasn't been published, the reason given is because it's an internal investigation, it's an internal matter. And I do think you're right, Sharon, to get to raise it with Ofcom because they are supposedly external. But at the moment, they're asking the BBC to mark their own homework, which is ridiculous.
Thank you, Nicholas. Sharon, what's your views?
Yeah, well, I think it's right on the spot. I think also I've heard from some friends who are working at the BBC about actually having many difficulties within in showing any kind of support for Israel and how they were actually targeted there as well. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing Nicholas raised is the true role of the Jewish community as well in spreading a lot of the truth. I mean, the bubble that social media actually creates here in Israel is like a closed bubble. But for you, as citizens, as people in your own community, you are connected to many people in your community. So when you share things on social media, when you comment on things on social media, it actually spread to much wider circles. And so it's very, very important for us as a community, for you as a community, to be active in social media. You know, and we see that, you know, usually the Jewish community is far less active than the pro-Palestinian community, where they really troll and target a lot of this information out, share, and many people who are pro-Israel, who are from the Jewish community, they stay silent and they don't share the actual truth. So it doesn't reach out. And so it's really up to you also, when you see truth, when you see good information, when you see things that needs to be shared, just click on it, comment, share. It will spread it to all your friends and some of your other contacts who are connected to your social media as well.
Thank you. Next question, Les Bloom. Les, could you unmute, please, and possibly turn on your camera?
Oh,
possible.
Is it? I don't know how to turn the camera on.
Don't worry, ask the question.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, thanks for start my video. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Anyway, right, here we are. Yeah,
See
thanks for, what time is it over there? Is it 12:30, is it?
No, it's 9:30. It's 9:30 in Israel.
Oh, is it? Oh, just that different. Okay. Anyway, you're talking about the BBC bias. I'm very concerned about the bias of other media outlets in the UK, and I'll give you some dead quick examples. The other day, they were talking about how Israel broke this, not on the BBC. I think this was on anyway, one of the other news channels.
Probably
How
Sky.
Israel broke the ceasefire. Okay. Israel didn't break the ceasefire. The ceasefire came to an end, right? So, you know, that was an outright misinformation. Towards the beginning of the war, there was an ITV reporter. He filmed somebody being shot, stood next to him by supposedly a sniper, and it turns out that was staged. It was, you know, the guy was just falling over, and it's a loud bang from way off. When the hospital that was supposedly bombed by the Israeli Air Force, that went around for weeks and weeks, and it wasn't the Israeli Air Force. It was Hamas themselves that bombed that hospital. I don't know if it was accidentally or deliberately. And the last one I just wanted, there's somebody on the radio the other day, one of the independent radio stations, and he was a surgeon supposedly working in Gaza. He's now back in the UK, and he was talking about how people are being tortured, how the IDF are torturing. I mean, it's complete, you know, everyone listening to me now knows that's just made up rubbish, not true. But, you know, that's been allowed to put out. So I don't know what you think, actually.
Thank you, Les. Sharon.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Liz. You're right. And it's very difficult to combat it. And there's a lot of propaganda. Just today, I had an interview on Channel 4 It was actually an interview to a podcast, and you probably know better than me, like their attitude towards Israel. But the guy was asking me something that sounded so ridiculous. He said that it was a fact that people were found in a hole after they were shot one by one into that hole, and that it was somehow connected to us. And I said, there's not a chance. These are fabrication, everything. And then I looked on the event and was so far away from the truth and from what was actually reported. But he already said it online. He already said it on the podcast. He already gonna spread it in the newsroom. And it's very difficult when they are really spreading fabrications, propaganda. You can't take it back. The thing is that most of the times, even when they're so anti-Israel, I still go on because I think we shouldn't leave that stage empty just to the pro-Hamas propaganda, and that we have to answer it. But a big problem is, like you say, reporters who are not doing their work, who are not being accurate, who are not looking on the fact, and are relying on a terrorist death cult as a reliable source. And that's a failure of the journalism of today as well. And so I find myself in a very tough spot of knowing I'm going into what you would call it like a trap, trying to spread lies, but who then gonna defend Israel?
Exactly.
And I think maybe in that sense it would be good to even a Jewish organization to set a list of people who can speak out, that understand the truth, the reality, who have access to knowledge, to facts, and go on and actually do those interviews. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Bernard Rubens. Bernard.
Hello. I think
Hello.
everything's been answered just about, but Sharon, great speech there. I live in Middlesbrough. I am actually the Middlesbrough Hebrew congregation. That's me. They're all dead. They're all in the cemetery. And I'm on my own. I married out years ago. I've got 4 children. And that's it. I go out every week to Leeds to walk the streets of Leeds with the Leeds Against Anti-Semitism group, which is fantastic. We put up with a lot of abuse from the Islamic side of things. I just feel I've got to be doing a lot more. The Bebas family in particular have touched me to the point of not sleeping, of crying, because I've got no family here. I've got family in London, and I've got a couple of members of family in Leeds. That's it. I work with a group of, I do a lot of artwork, and we work in a group, a creative friends group. And these are friends, but they'll say, look what happened in Israel and this, that, and the other. And I get to the point where I feel like choking them, to be honest with you, because they're just talking an absolute load of rubbish. And they're listening to that Jeremy Boyne bloke, absolutely just talking junk. He's actually said this week, he respects Hamas because their figures are accurate with the deaths. I mean, he was the one that was covering the news when they bombed that hospital and blamed Israel. What can we do as a local side of things, bearing in mind that Andy MacDonald is the main Middlesbrough representative on the government, who is an out-and-out anti-Semite and gave a speech on the 8th of October, if you remember, pro-Palestine. What can you do in this particular case? Am I allowed to go to my local radio station and ask what they're doing about this? What do you do? I don't know. I'm just on my own and looking over my shoulder. I wear my Star and David when I go out and my little ribbon and everything because I'm not giving into it. But it's very daunting when you're absolutely on your own, retired, just waiting for something to happen, but you want to get your point across.
Yeah.
particularly with the BBC, they're spending my money, they're spending all my friends' money. We're paying, I've just had £28 something taken out for my license fee, and they're spending it on terrorism, really. It's horrendous.
Sharon.
Yeah, no, first of all, I really feel you, you know, after the 7th of October, I think the toughest point was for me, the Beavis family. I have my eldest one is 4-year-old and my twins are 2.5-year-old. So they are the same age that Ariel and Kfir were meant to be today. And since the 7th of October, you know, I used to wake up every night, see that they're in their beds, go and hug them. Just knowing how lucky I am that my babies are actually sleeping in their beds. And for this entire time until now, they're always in my mind and in my heart. It's very difficult. And in the position that we're in, it's not anymore about Israel. This is also about the values that they actually spread in the UK as well. Because when they spread those ideas, proud of Hamas, of a terrorist organization, it means that those radical jihadist ideas that they represent, that they commit, those crimes, that they're proud of those crimes against humanity, that's coming to your front door. It means that they're not just whitewashing those crimes against humanity, they're giving legitimacy to it. And if that happens and has legitimacy in Israel, it has legitimacy also in the UK. There's a reason why it's a crime, why it's considered a terrorist organization, the funding, the supporting. And I think that also the UK are at a point where it's not about Israel, it's not about the Jewish community. Your entire population needs to make a decision. When you see them marching in London with terrorist flags, they don't hate Israel. They hate your values. They're burning your flag. They hate what you represent. When you see the pro-Israel demonstration, you see them waving proudly Israeli flags and British flags. And in the pro-Palestinians demonstration, you see them burning the British flag. You see them waving terrorists, the Houthis flag, Hezbollah's flag, the Hamas flag, waving it out proudly. So it's not about Israel, it's about you and what you want to spread in your country, in your community. Because what you've seen in Israel on the 7th of October, you know, this is just the start. This is just the promo of what's coming to Europe, of what's coming to America, of what is already in Africa, of what is in South and Central America. I mean, look, Hezbollah, which is the army of Iran, is already controlling the illegal drug and weapon trafficking routes there in Central and South America. What is Hezbollah doing there? They're trying to pose a threat on America. Trump's war against the cartel is not just about the drugs and the illegal weapons and that. It's about Iran and about Iran posing a serious threat on America. And so I think that your community has to wake up and they have to make a choice. Do they choose those values that you represent, that you believe, that are shared with Israel? Or do they choose those terrorist organizations? And many of your reporters are stating a very clear statement. They support those radical jihadists, covering up for them. And so I think that, you know, you do whatever you can. You hear someone supporting Hamas, you hear someone spreading lies, you write a letter about it. You write to Ofcom, you write to your local representative, and when that mounts, then there should be a proper investigation in it. Don't let them go away with it. I actually try to check whether I can actually sue in the name of Israel in Britain about those you know, about those lies that they're spreading. Unfortunately, legally, I can't do that. But, you know, when it comes to funding a terrorist organization, this is a red line that you cannot cross, and they have to be investigated for that.
Thank you, Sharon. That was wonderful. Michael Goldberg, you're next. Could you unmute, please? And if possible, turn your camera on, if possible. Lovely.
Shalom, Sharon. Name
Shalom.
Shalom.
Just a quick question. Apart from the fact that if you look, we've got a problem. If you look at all the faces that we see here today, we're all too old. We need to get the youth. We need to be in the universities, and that's where it all comes from. My next problem is this. You have a lovely ambassador here, but she's not native speaker, and she needs to be. The amount of times I've had to speak with Israelis, and you can hear I come from an Israeli background. My problem is explaining you have to do things slightly differently. Going in like a tank doesn't work all the time. You have to do things slightly differently. And I think that we've had ambassadors here in the past that are better at understanding the nuances of English than we have at the moment. I don't, this is something that I don't know that you can answer on, but I think that is something for you to look at, because you need somebody who is sympathetic, that looks sympathetic, that feels in those ways. That's is there any other way we can move something like that forward? You need to have that.
Thank you, Sharon.
So a couple of things. The first one is about the younger generation. And that's extremely important. I've been working with a few young organizations many times in the UK, like the Pinsker Center. They are vital. They're doing incredible work, and you should support them and get your children and your grandchildren active. It's about their future, not about the future of Israel, but about their future and their safety in your country. So I think, you know, they might not be here, but is a movement growing. And every time I came, usually the room was full of young people, and that was very comforting to see and to know that. Like I do the Zoom tonight, I do sometimes a Zoom with them as well. They're doing good work, and there should be more organizations like that.
Thank you. Thank you so. Oh, sorry. The other questions you mentioned, the other points. Yes.
Yeah. I'm getting there. Look, you know, the thing is that it doesn't matter whether you're a native speaker or not. The Israeli ambassadors all around the world, not in most of the countries, are not the most popular ones. And there's many complaints about them, but at the end of the day, they're very professional, and they know how to represent Israel as well.
Yes,
I think I'll tell you, look, I spent 7 really nice years in Australia. And so my English is not perfect either. I think, you know, even in my post, I still have comments about my grammar and about some of my accent and everything. I think that we have many civilian public speakers who are brilliant, that are going online. We have initiatives also at the foreign ministry to push them in certain areas when we see that Israel's voice is not being heard. But a lot of, you know, we have thousands of people actually working for the foreign ministry all around the world. Not all of them are native speakers, and it's okay. I think that the point is to know to bring as many reliable and good speaker there as well. The spokesperson for the embassy in London is not just, you know, putting CP in you know, like on shows and in interviews, but many others, officials in the government, parliament members, and civilian ones. And I think that's good. It's not one person that can do all of it, and we need to spread it as much as possible. But as I said also, it's very important to have local initiatives that pushes local people to hear your voice, your community voice in the media. That's, I think, even more important because, you know, even when you have the best speaker, and you've had, I think, one of them, Mark Regev, which is a dear friend who was a great ambassador before, he's being seen as an Israeli agent when he's the ambassador and he speaks on television. And so people that are coming from civil society, local people, people from the Jewish community, not from the Jewish community, I think that those are the most powerful speaker because you're not viewed that way. And this is also the reason why I actually took my advisor, Tim Smith, who was actually working in London, to come and give us a very outside point of view to help me and in the foreign ministry to actually understand better what we need to do better in the foreign media. But remember, we're much smaller. We are with a very small budget in comparison to our enemies, and that's why we have to join forces together, everything we can.
I think the other thing you need to address is Wikipedia. Some things have already
Yeah,
been done, but
this is
Wikipedia
a
needs
full
somebody working on it.
campaign. This
Mm.
is a full campaign that they've actually gone on to try and distort Wikipedia. We've tried to report many of them. These are bots also that are committed, and that's the thing. They are much bigger numbers than what we have here in Israel. But we're on it as well, and we've started reporting them where we know we're trying to figure out their algorithm and how they're doing it, but I know we are on that as well.
Thank you. Let's we've got time perhaps for a couple more questions. And those I have to disappoint, you can always ask David later.
I'll try and do it shorter. Yeah.
Leah F. I don't know who you are. Leah F. Could you unmute, please? And if possible, turn on your camera.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Sharren. Shalom. What I wanted to say is I hope that this conversation that we can have today together is really solution focused. And from my perspective, watching how this war has unfolded, and you spoke about it being on many fronts, my personal view is that the whole aim of this war was to drag Israel through a media war into this particular situation, for example. So what I'm proposing, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to
So
say.
when David Collier comes on, I'd like to listen to it.
Sorry, carry on, Leah.
You're open.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I'm hoping we can talk about is, it's obvious to me, I don't know how other people feel about it, that the mainstream media problem is not an error, it's by design. However, there are lots of people who we know, our contacts, and there are many people who are allies. For example, people who are activists who are also getting attacked. For example, in the UK, I'll just give one example, like Nihat Gorbani, who often goes out to marches, constantly getting arrested. He speaks about Hamas being a terrorist organization. So my question and suggestion is, with our contacts and allies, the new media is speaking to many, many people now, and in the online spaces, they talk to many more people than the mainstream. So for example, for me, I'm quite active with 2C TV, and I do have contacts with them. I'm sure they would be interested, for example, in speaking to you, interviewing you, covering you. And I think that if we're all able to continue putting pressure of this information out there, it's more likely that we can push a tipping point to put pressure so the police have to address that money from taxpayers that we are forced to pay through the TV license is going to organizations which are prescribed terror organizations in the
Leah,
UK.
I've got to let Sharren answer now. Sharren.
Okay. A couple of things. The main idea behind starting the 7th of October was Iran's idea to stop the stabilization of the Middle East and the agreements that were meant to come with the Saudis about the normalization, the Abraham Accord, and joining them in. The greatest enemy of Iran is stability, and that war was the goal, to create instability so that they can infiltrate more places. And thank God their plans didn't go the way that they actually wanted. I won't go too much into what had happened there, but I'm more than happy to speak to any outlet, okay, to CTV, any other ones. What I'll do, I'll put in the chat here Tim's number, who and any news outlet that you have contact with. I'll be more than happy to go on and do those interviews. And if I can, to find a good speaker that can actually speak in behalf of Israel to represent us in there.
Thank you, Sharon. The last question for Sharon, David May. David.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Good.
David.
Just a very, very quick one. I'm the Leicester's Board of Deputy Representative. And there are a number of points I want to cover very briefly because we've got a Gomorrah clause to go in a few minutes. First of all, Phil Rosenberg from the Board of Deputies and his team have had numerous, and I mean numerous, meetings with the hierarchy of the BBC. It hasn't been well publicised, and we've tried to keep it fairly low-key and under the radar. And it's particular. We've done this for a particular reason. But we have had a lot of representations, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes which you may or may not know about. The BBC policing themselves is absolutely ludicrous, and the sooner that the government get their act together, the better. Our local MP happens to be Shochat Adam. Now, he was elected purely and simply on Gaza, 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 nothing else. All his publicity, which was all done illegally because there was no name of who printed it and no name who authored it, all on Gaza, and he got in and he overturned a 26,000 majority from our Labour MP. So that's my second point. The third point is, I agree with whoever mentioned that the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, doesn't speak with an English tone. Now, I know Zippy, and she does a phenomenal work, and she's very, very good. But I have to say that Mark Regev, who you mentioned, was a brilliant.
Okay.
Sorry. Can we please have sorry. Can we please have people on mute? David, carry on.
Yeah, Mark Regev came across very, very well. He was very English speaking. And I do think people are representing Israel. That's a real problem. Israel from the embassy. If they speak with an Israeli accent, they do tend to come across as very Israeli, and the anti-Semites come out of their shells. Lastly, I have to tell you that the structure of the BBC and the staff, I know a number of staff that are Jewish, and anti-Semitism within the BBC is rife, and they live their lives on eggshells. And the sooner we do something about it, the better. As I say, the BOD are doing their very best. I have to go now. I thank you very much, Sharon, for hosting the meeting. It was brilliant, and I think the more we have of these, the better that we get our ideas into the open and help as much as we can to get rid of the anti-Semites that are in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sharon.
Thank you, David. I just have to say, I truly believe Tzipi Chotovely is doing a wonderful work. She is Israeli. We are Israeli. We will speak. When you are trying to get someone from Spain to actually give comments on something that's happening in Spain, they'll speak with a Spanish accent. And so it's important to also understand we have professional people who are doing good work. Do we need more also English-speaking people? Yes, absolutely. But I also want to remind you that Mark Regev was Australian and not British as well. He did a great work as well, but You know, we are being hated because we are Israeli agents. That's how they view us. They don't see us as humans, but as Israeli propaganda machines or something like that. And whether Tsipi would have had a British accent or not, specifically during this year and a half, would have been the most difficult position she can do, to try against all of this mass propaganda against Israel as well. So we have civilian speakers as well, but it's also important. We are Israelis, and with the Israeli accent as well, we can represent Israel in a very professional way.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Can I now call on our Vice Chairman, Lawrence Julius, to propose a vote of thanks to Sharon? Lawrence, are you there? No? Oh dear. In which case, Steve, would you like to propose a vote of thanks?
Need to be unmuted. Hi.
Oh, there you are, Lawrence.
I'm here. Hi, Sharon. First of all, I agree with you with Zippy. I think she is doing a good job. The problem is she's not being invited on the media very often. She's being ignored.
Yeah.
On behalf of the NGA, I would like to thank you for the excellent work you're doing, exposing the BBC. The BBC is by far the world's most powerful media organization. It has a global audience of 500 million people. It's a trusted voice in countries where the local news source isn't trusted. It's listened to by thought leaders, and it's really the head of the snake when it comes to dealing with the media. If we can address the problem with the BBC, I'm sure a lot of the other media channels will change. So it's really important. I also think that the work you're doing is great. People like Trevor Asserson with the Asserson Report, Ruth Deitch and Danny Cohn with their report, Camera, UKLFI, lots of other people are doing work. And the one pity which I find, which we need to do, we all need to work together. Together we are much stronger. The BOD have, for example, not supported the Asserson report, or not supported loudly the various reports, not brought everyone together. If we all work together, it is much stronger, that we can expose the systemic issues at the BBC and hopefully get changed. But a very big thank you from all your friends in London.
Thank you so much. I think that was very accurate. And I think that we have to bring also, you know, non-Jewish UK citizen that needs to realize that it's always the Jews first, but the Christians are always next. And so it's not just us standing together, but it's the entire community standing together.
Thank you, Sharon. I'd like to add my thanks to what Lawrence has just said. And you're very welcome to stay for the next 45 minutes or so when we have David Collier
very much.
speaking to
Will
us.
do.
And you're welcome to stay. Before I call on David Collier and introduce David Collier, I just wanted to remind everyone, our next event is tomorrow night at Stanmore on Cannons Park Synagogue, where Natasha Hausdorff and Nan Hertzberg are speaking. And then after that, on the 11th of May, put that date in your diary. It's our anti-Semitism conference, which we're holding together with Our Fight and several other Christian organizations. And the venue is South Hampstead Synagogue. And finally, 1st to the 4th of September will be our next trip to Israel. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce David Collier to you, who's well known to many of us. David is probably the leading fighter against anti-Semitism in Britain, in my opinion. He's a researcher on anti-Semitism inside anti-Zionist activity and works tirelessly in the United Kingdom to expose it wherever it manifests itself. In 2017, David was named by the Allgemeiner in the J100 as one of the top 100 people in the world positively influencing Jewish life. And in 2022, the media watchdog Camera gave David Collier a Portrait of Courage award. David has researched BBC coverage extensively, both pre and post 7th of October 2023, and has exposed countless failings in the BBC's coverage of Israel's war against Hamas, including the recent exposure of the BBC's documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, in which David exposed how the programme's 13-year-old boy narrator was in fact the son of a Hamas official. David, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you. Over to you.
Good evening. Well, yeah, it's 10 o'clock. Firstly, I'm apologise for the fact, I'm not going to apologise for the fact that I'm here because I'm in Tel Aviv and I don't want to come home. So There you go. Look, I mean, firstly, it was great listening to Sharren. I mean, she's an excellent speaker, and she's obviously well versed in so many areas. What I don't want to do then is get into a repetitive nature of going over the same ground, because so much ground has actually been covered over the last hour. So I'm almost sort of a mind to go straight to questions almost. One thing I will say, and it's regarding the ambassador, and I'm moving backwards on some of the questions I heard. I think it's unfair of us to attack the ambassador. And I don't think it would matter greatly who was the ambassador. We have to accept that what is taking place is a hostility towards Israel and Israelis. And no matter who was in the seat after October the 7th, they would be facing a hostile audience. Israel is a nation of the Middle East, in the Middle East, and the population of Israelis. And we don't have the same thing. You look at other embassies, you see the other ambassadors standing on television. They don't have to be English speakers to make a point. The problem that Israeli ambassadors have is they face the hostility, the anti-Semitism that is effectively part of the problem that we're addressing this evening. But anyway, obviously, I would imagine most people here actually know what happened with the BBC and with the documentary. I've heard several descriptions of it, so I won't go over that ground again. And basically, guys, you just want to start with the questions.
Okay, I'm going to just ask the first question, then I'll throw it open to everyone else. So many mainstream journalists these days, what they tend to do is they amplify some kind of anti-Semitic narrative, and they say, oh, no, it's not anti-Semitic, it's just anti-Zionism. What do you think we, the Jewish community, and indeed our friends in the Christian communities, should be doing to fight back against this, essentially this slander?
Okay. All right. Firstly, I think it's a rabbit hole. I think the entire argument is a rabbit hole. I want you to imagine, if you can, a classroom, and I've used this analogy before. Imagine a classroom, and imagine that in the classroom are 19 white kids and 1 black child. And the classroom's quite rowdy. And the teacher decides that they need to make an example of someone. And so they pick on the child who happens to be black to make an example of that child, sends the child out the classroom. That's fine. You turn around and say, okay, you know what? Wanted to make an example of a child, chose the child who was black, and that was it. Well, what happens if it happens again the following week, and the week after, and the week after that, and goes on and on and on? It wouldn't take very long before people would turn around and say, you know what, this teacher is a racist. Because the racism isn't in, the child may not be behaving very well. The teacher may even have a point, but it is the constant obsession of the teacher picking out just that child that is the racist act. And we have the same thing with the media in the UK. It is the obsession that the anti-Semitism is not what they see in the microscope that they place on the state of Israel. The anti-Semitism is the microscope itself. That's the anti-Semitism. It's the obsession that they have, this fixation with Israel, the fact that Israel is treated differently from every other nation on earth. That's the starting point. We can get into the issue of content and the fact that they also tell lies and so on and so forth. But I think it's more important to address the fact that it's the microscope rather than the individual issues. And following on from that as well, you know, Israel is demonized. Let's pick on the BBC because I like picking on the BBC. Israel is demonized by the BBC. Okay, so we as Jews, we turn around and we defend Israel because we know that the BBC is lying. But when Israel turns Israel into a demon state and we defend Israel, by extension, what the BBC is doing is it's turning the British Jewish population into people who will defend a demon state. We are then looked on that way by other members of the British population. In this way, what the BBC are doing is, I believe, spreading. I see them as the biggest spreaders of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom today. So there's all these things going on. And I do think it's a mistake to turn and say, well, it's that headline that's anti-Semitic, or it's that journalist that's anti-Semitic. It's actually the big picture, the real problem that we've got the real problem with.
David, thank you. Right, we've got 6 or 7 questions. That's great. Max Radford, you're next. Could you please unmute? Lovely.
Hi there.
Hi
How you
there.
doing? I actually had my hand up since Sharren was on. Actually, I know Sharren well, so I was hoping to ask her a question too. And David met briefly before. So the first thing I just wanted to say is that one of the things that we really, really struggle with is the power of amplification. I know that, as some of you may have seen some of the content that I myself do. And actually what I find is, despite all the support that we have a lot of people that like, very few people that comment, and hardly anybody that shares. And that lack of amplification is very much driven by fear. So that's just something I wanted to make a point when Sharren was talking earlier. Apologies for skipping over to the David part of this as well. The one other thing that I do want to mention, and I know it's been spoken about just now, this discussion about the ambassadors that we've had. And actually, it's something that I wrote to the embassy about 8 years ago. And I actually discussed with Tippi Hotovelli giving a talk about this in her home at the residency about a month ago to a lot of young Jewish activists. And it's not about having an Israeli accent, and I can tell you that as an Israeli, but I don't have an Israeli accent myself. It's actually just about the mastery of the English language. And it's not about the mastery necessarily of the speaker, but sometimes it's of the interviewer. And that's a little area where our spokespeople get spun around by interviewees, by people that are interviewing on the BBC and the like. And we really, really do struggle with that, and we do need to do better. And we were very lucky with Mark Regev and with Ron Prosser, who was very accomplished in English. So we are having a bit of difficulty there. Sorry, I had to get that out. That was the Sharren bit. With regards to David and regards to the BBC, I think one thing, and David, if you can correct me on any of this, people seem to see here in the UK, think of the BBC as a non-commercial entity where we just pay like kind of license fee and we fund what goes on there. But actually, I believe the reality is slightly different, in that what we see domestically in the BBC is non-commercial. But actually, there is BBC World and everything else that they do outside, which is commercial. And everything that they produce here, they then amplify out there, which is why I agree with David that the BBC are by far the biggest amplifier of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic messaging there is, because they give the Gestamper, the stamp of approval. If the BBC said it, any other media organization around the world is quite happy to repeat it. So they do a lot of damage. I would like to ask David and anyone else who knows, are we in a position now where we can have a class action against the BBC? We are all paying for it. We are forced to pay for it. I'm sure they're in breach of lots of stuff in their charter, but I feel that just one or two people, I don't know if I'm in danger saying this, not paying their license fee, is not enough. Are we in a position to take this far, far bigger, David? Because I believe that's what we need to do.
Thanks, Max. David.
You'd need to ask a lawyer.
Have you asked a lawyer?
No, I'm just saying.
We're trying.
No, I mean,
but...
I'm not a lawyer, and you'd need to ask a lawyer. The one thing I will do again, I mean, we've now had like 3 or 4, attacks, or basically attacks on the ambassador. It's not what this is about. I'm telling you, it would not matter if Brad Pitt was our ambassador. It's irrelevant. We are facing a hostility. One of the problems that I think we have here is that people are addressing the issue as if it is one of goodwill. There's no goodwill here. We are under attack. The attack is sinister. It's deliberate, and they will chop the legs off of anyone who tries to stick up for the state of Israel. Now, you may be right. You may be right that if we had an ambassador that spoke better English, you'd feel better for it. It wouldn't make much difference on the ground, because the battle that we're fighting here is far bigger than, the identity of the ambassador of the United Kingdom. Anyway, when it comes
question,
to
David, sorry, just to apologize. I wasn't saying myself about the ambassador. What I'm saying is that in general, strategically, the language and the narrative and the words that we use collectively, whether it's an ambassador, a prime minister, or any other spokesman for Israel, has never been consistent in even the words that we use. And we struggle with our narrative.
I accept that. We live in the United Kingdom. We're privileged to live in the United Kingdom, in Hendon, in Golders Green, and so on. We are talking about Israel, a country that is being attacked by 7 different nations, that is sending its children to war, that has 50 people still in Gaza, and you're complaining about the language of the person it sends as an ambassador. I think it's wrong. I think we need to take responsibility for what's taking place here, and we need to give the Israelis a little bit of credit for the trouble. I mean, sirens went off yesterday. Sirens went off the day before. They're living a very, very different life to the one we live, and we should be a little bit more considerate about it.
Thank you, David. Victor Bentata, come off mute, please.
Yeah, so just wanted to pick up on a couple of points. I think Max started off with a point about fear that Jews in this country have of liking, commenting, reposting, etc. I wonder whether David would, I don't know, I mean, I don't know whether David's too far away from this perspective to comment, but in my experience, a lot of British Jews feel an extraordinary allegiance to British institutions. Dare one
We
say,
do, don't we?
I know maybe not in this forum, but dare one say, even the BBC, what can be done to kind of convince people that actually what you say is true? Because, you know, we're all here, and I've come across quite a lot of you on various fora, including Max, and I think we all have essentially why we may have different discussions here. I think we all have essentially a very similar point of view about things like the BBC. But so many Jews are just hoping that the BBC will eventually be nice to them, that the police will eventually be nice to them, that the mayor will eventually be nice to them.
Yeah.
What can we do to try and influence the mainstream who are still trying to keep their head down? So that was, dare one say that was one thing. And the other thing, almost the opposite, was, I dare say, sorry, this isn't entirely the BBC, but one thing that I worry about a lot is that as soon as we kind of protest against the BBC, as soon as we protest against these endless sort of marches, and so many of the people in these marches don't seem to be Palestinian at all. They seem to be Irish or NHS. How do we get painted as being extremely right-wing? How do we create a middle ground narrative? I'm sorry, I appreciate that might be nothing to do with what you were here to talk about, David.
No, look,
Thank you, Victor. David.
Yeah, firstly, look, you're right. I gave someone this analogy. I think that we're on the Titanic, right? And I often start off when I give talks by apologizing that I'm going to depress people, because I'm not here to make people feel better. I'm here to tell people what I see. And this isn't just about the Jews, which is really important. And it's something that was said earlier by the MK. You know, we're going through societal change, and it poses a lot of long-term threats, not just for us, but for everybody. And sometimes it's more convenient and it's easier for people just to believe that everything's going to be okay. And like I said, I see us as being on the Titanic. So I think like the Jewish community plays different roles in this. One of my roles, for example, is I go around screaming, telling people to get on the lifeboats, or other people going around getting buckets of water, trying to chuck the water off the side, which is also fair. Do something. I see the BOD as just, you know, playing the violin on the decks of the Titanic, trying to calm everybody down as if everything's going to be okay. We heard earlier, for example, that they are in these high-level talks with the BBC. I'll be honest with you, I think the BOD are the last people I would want in the room with the BOD, with the BBC talking, because these are, you know, their attitude and their positions on so many things are too accommodating. You know, we are at war and we need to wake everybody up. And turning around and trying to pretend things are just going to be okay, or they're going to calm down, or it's going to get better, it's not real and it's not true. Every single time since like the early 2000s that there has been a conflict, it has got worse. 2008 was worse than the Intifada. 2011 was worse than 2008. 2014 worse than 2011. We're seeing a rise all the time. So the first thing we have to get out of our complacency and realize that we are facing a societal change. The rise of, I mean, we've got these it's almost like a perfect storm. And it's something I saw someone write something about the 1930s. I don't believe it is the 1930s. And whilst I accept that the message is we're in danger, I'll accept that. I'll accept that comparison. I also think it can be misleading. We have a rise in an Islamist community that is basically these people, they work at the NHS, they work in academia, they work in schools, they work in the BBC, they work in, and this is part of the problem. If the BBC employs people from Al Jazeera, and we heard earlier that Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood. But if the BBC and Sky and The Guardian don't see anything wrong with employing people who used to work for the Qatari mouthpiece, how many of these people do they have to employ before they start looking like Al Jazeera themselves? So my main message here is we need to break down the complacency. We need to get people to understand that this isn't just about the Jews. Because when we're dealing with the rise of Islamism, we may be on the front line here, but there are others that will follow.
Thank you, David. Peter Baum. Peter, if you can't mute, please. And if possible, turn your camera on.
Hi, Dave. Can you hear me?
We can certainly
hear you loud and clear.
Can't see you though.
No, I can't turn off for some reason, my video won't go off. But anyway, David, nice to speak to you. And my question is as follows.
Yeah.
Do you believe, as I do, that rather like Israel's position in the United Nations, the Jewish community's position with the BBC is a lost cause? It's a battle that we're not going to win because it's too far gone. It's too ingrained in the BBC psyche regarding their position and agenda towards the Jewish state of Israel. And if you do agree with that, my second question is, do you think it's time for those of us who are proactively every day of our lives supporting the Jewish state of Israel, change tack, and instead of defending Israel's position, we should, a group of us, a very proactive group who are with, who have access to the media, decide on a strategy where we all are speaking from the same script?
Right. Firstly, when it comes to all speaking from the south, because the first part was, I'll get to in a second, we won't ever all speak from the same script. And as much as it's nice to stand here and say, wouldn't it be great if we could work together? We don't. We just don't. And I've been independent for so long, and I'm not affiliated, and I've seen so many of these divisions amongst communities. And yes, a group starts off, and then after 2 or 3 months, they've split up into 2 groups, this, that, and the other. We just don't. We don't see eye to eye on so much that I think we should keep our things realistic and just say, yeah, it would be nice, but I don't think it's going to happen. As for a lost cause, yes, it is. Firstly, the BBC is an extension of British society. Let's not hold it apart. It reflects or is a mirror of issues that are taking place elsewhere, as is Amnesty International and Sky News and The Guardian and Academia and everything else, right? It is no more than the sum of its parts. So when the BBC reports, the people that are reporting, the people that work there, and we know who works there, and we know that the issues that they have, and I'll just give you an example, and it's actually not the documentary. I'm going to give you an example that took place about a week ago. When Israel resumed strikes on Gaza, after the ceasefire ended, Israel resumed strikes, and the Israelis hadn't done anything for quite a few weeks, which meant the initial strikes would have been very, very targeted, because Israel had a month or a month and a half to sit and watch what Hamas were doing. So in those initial strikes, the very first targeted buildings, or Israel would have known exactly who they were hitting. That is such a logical position to understand, that Israel had a month and a half to look, so therefore the initial strikes were, the BBC came at it completely the other way. The BBC wrote an article about grieving fathers, showing how these families had been murdered and how this man had lost his pregnant wife and his little baby, and another one had lost 3 children. And it was obvious to me from the very beginning that they were terrorist families. But because it didn't enter the BBC's mind, it's possible to understand the way they look at it, because they are driven by an anti-Semitic mindset that has demonized Israel. It doesn't matter what Israel does. It doesn't matter what Israel says, and it doesn't matter what the truth is. The BBC has an agenda. It has a story to tell. And that is what it does. So it is way, way, way past saving, because it won't be able to save itself. It has issues. Part of it has been overrun by the progressive left. Another part of it has been overrun by Islamists. The progressive lefts will stand with their colleagues, the Islamists, believing Israel is the worst evil in the world. And you cannot expect that organization to look at itself, mark its own homework, and find itself guilty. It never will. It is beyond salvation, and we should not expect anything more than them coming out with maybe a scapegoat or two to try to blame and try to pretend as if they can just carry on as normal. And we must not let them do it.
Thank you, David. Stephen Franklin, could you come off mute, please? Can you come off mute, Stephen? I can see you're trying. Yep, great.
Great. Now, I think it's not just the BBC amongst the news media in Britain. You mentioned Sky News, but it's also ITV News and Channel 4 News. They're just as bad in the quality of what they don't have as big a reach outside Britain, but they're just as bad inside Britain. The NUJ in 2014 voted to boycott Israel, and they've never voted to boycott any other country. And last year, I think they voted that the journalists broadcasting should show a Palestinian flag visibly. And they didn't seem to realize the principle of being seen to be impartial, even if they're not. They just completely biased the news media. But I think there is something which Israel could do which would help. Because the Palestinians use professional PR companies to advise them at every stage of the route. They come and they don't create their message, they tell them how to present their message. And they do it very effectively, and it works. And I think that Israel could learn something from that.
Thank you, Stephen. David.
Right, Stephen, a couple of things. Firstly, I'm again going to repeat a message I said earlier. I accept everything you're saying, but I will go over it again and again and again. I do not feel that we are justified as British Jews making any complaints or demands about the state of Israel. They're the ones that are sending their children into battle. They're the ones who put their children in Gaza and in Lebanon. They're the ones living under fire. And we're sitting here saying, why don't they do this? Well, I know, I get that. I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying, because there may be other questions based on the same level. I will defend and protect Israel's right just to be Israel fighting the war. We should accept the sacrifices that the Israelis make and the difficulties in which they live. In any event, yes, I've said always as well from the very beginning of this talk, and it's something I firmly believe, where I agree with you. The BBC is just an extension of British society. The issues that we have in the BBC are no different from the issues with Sky or with ITN or with The Guardian or with a whole range of media outlets, or if we move into academia or we move into the schools or the unions. Personal story here, the NUJ you bring up. I was a member of the NUJ. I'm actually about to publish a story about it. I was a member of the NUJ, and I let my membership lapse because I stopped going on the streets. I only did it because I needed a press card as a defense mechanism. I needed to be able to identify to the police that I'm a member of the press. The membership actually expired in October 2023. And I found myself suddenly with all of these demonstrations wanting to go back on the streets. So I applied and they started messing me around. I'd been a member twice and I could not get through. And I know now why, because the gatekeeper, I've got him in an image walking through Liverpool with a Friends of Al-Aqsa badge on at a pro-Palestine event. He's the person that basically turned me down. So I asked them, I explicitly said, look, I need this for protection. I can't go on the streets without the press card. I need it for protection. And the person who turned me down is a pro-Palestinian activist who basically wanted to deny me the protection from the very people he was standing alongside. But anyway, that's the NUJ, so expect nothing from them.
Thank you, David. Tom Block. Tom, could you come off mute, please?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Sue, and I was just going to ask you, in the last few days, there have been demonstrations by Gazans who are saying that they don't like Hamas anymore and they want them to stop. And today I read that, in fact, some of those protesters have been brutally murdered, and I have seen nothing on the news that actually portrays that. And I just wonder, I suppose, how we get them to actually say things like that.
Thank you. I'm not going to call you Tom because you're obviously not Tom. Although, you know, I might, you know, I mean, in these days and age, I mean, I might be getting myself into trouble for saying that. But anyway, noted. Look, firstly, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're dealing with a situation. It's difficult to know exactly what's happening in Gaza. Right, truly. I mean, we see things happening the other way and we automatically say that may not be true or it may be staged and so on and so forth. So when I first saw the demonstrations, I thought, you know, I wasn't 100% convinced, but it does actually seem as if some brave Gazans have come out in opposition. And from what I understood today, Hamas have murdered at least 6 of them. One thing it automatically should tell the media is this, that if you say anything that Hamas doesn't like, they will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
If that is the case, then every single journalist in Gaza is saying exactly what Hamas wants them to say. And if that is the case, then by giving them a platform and a voice over the last 17 or 18 months, all our media have been doing is acting as a puppet for radical Islamic terrorist groups. As for how we get the message out, again, it comes back to the issue of goodwill. I don't believe there is any. I don't believe that tapping on someone's shoulder and saying, hey, Mr. Journalist, have you noticed this over here? I think you should report it, will get you any bandwidth whatsoever. They know what they're doing. We are up against a strategy and, you know, people who are there to demonize Israel. That's their role. Their job at the BBC, some of these journalists, is simply to demonize Israel. And you talking to them just stops there, you know, gets in their way. They're not interested. I've had far too many complaints rejected for absolutely no reason. I know that they're not interested in the truth. So I think we need to come at this, at least if we're going to have a response and we're going to build a strategy, we have to understand that we're not talking to people who can be our friends. We're talking to the enemy, and we need to deal with them like the enemy.
Right, thank you very much. Going to ask next Stavina Southwell, as she hasn't asked the question yet. Stavina.
Hello, David. Thank you very much. I'm a great admirer of yours and from the Christian community. And I've seen you interviewed on Simon Barrett's show on Revelation TV and CBN. And, you know, from my perspective, it's a real shame that, you know, these broadcasts can't go mainstream. And I've said that quite a lot, you know, to CBN and Revelation TV. So I just personally wanted to say thank you very much for all that you're doing, really. So thank you.
Firstly, there's no need to really no need to thank me. I am part of a community in the United Kingdom that is trying to stick up for Western society, for the Judeo-Christian traditions and values. You are also part of that community. We are allies in the fight, and there is really no need to thank me.
Okay, thank you, Stavina. Abigail Sensi Di Bello, you haven't asked a question yet, so over to you.
Hi again, David. Thank you on behalf of the community for all the amazing work you're doing. I think above all, I think there is just an overwhelming sense of frustration. You know, I think all of us are members of multiple WhatsApp groups, sharing various different stories and outrage about the bias, and we're all very much aware of it. But you know, we've mentioned quite a few times strategy. You know, some of us respond, some of us repost things, some of us go out to the streets and demonstrate. You know, some of us have kind of one-on-one conversations, but I know you're not in favor of obviously all of us uniting. But one thing, again, don't mean to flatter you too much, but when you do look at things that do make a difference, I think it's undisputed about what your research has done. It's created headlines. It was talked about by Donald Trump. You know, it's the kind of thing that really did, you know, pack a punch. I don't know what the funding is like, but why are you not receiving more funding? Why are you not scaling up your work? Why are you not getting an army of people together to really just, you know, duplicate what you're doing on, you know, on a much greater level? Because I do agree with you. We are talking to the enemy, and it is media warfare that we're facing. But I don't feel that we've got enough of a battalion really to build on the momentum that you've already achieved so far.
Thank you, Abigail. David.
Firstly, thank you very much. Look, it's not that I don't support the idea of working together. I very much do. I would love it if we could work together, well, all of us. It's just that you know, I find that there's only one of me, and this is an important message and an important part of the message. There's just one of me. I have a computer. I sit in a room. I sit alone in the room. I have one keyboard, and there's no special secret here. Everything that I managed to do, and you know, over the years, I mean, when we were dealing with Corbyn, I was in secret Facebook groups with Corbyn, writing reports on him like 10 years ago. It's possible just for one guy with a keyboard to do. You know, I think because you're talking about overwhelming, and you're right. You know, you can sit there with WhatsApp and you open your WhatsApp after 5 minutes and you've missed 264 messages, you know. I know this is like, and when it's multiple groups, it's like 264 messages in 24 different groups, and you can spend your whole day just trying to scroll through to see what it is you missed. It is overwhelming. One of the things that I actually do is I limit actually that side of things, because a lot of it is repetitive. You know, it's the same people saying the same things and sharing in the same groups. If a group's about an action, or it's, you know, you should get some of the groups that are actually out there doing activities and they're arranging to go on demonstrations and things like that, it's a bit different. But for the actual raw communications, I'd actually advise people to limit a little bit, because there's no real value in just reading the same thing over and over and over again. But yeah, look, it's scaling up is difficult, because if I was to scale up, it would mean, I did actually talk about it not long ago. I said, look, maybe I should teach people how to do what it is that I do. Because there's obviously, I mean, I have a method that I could perhaps pass on, which is something that I agree with you. Maybe I should do that. But I also find that if I stop doing what I'm doing, then who's going to be doing what it is that I'm doing, if you know what I mean?
Thank you, David. Have we got 10 more minutes?
I'm fine. I'm easy.
Okay, well, we've got 2 more people to ask questions. Both of them asked before, but they can ask a second question. Leah F, would you come off mute, Leah F, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll keep it brief because it's really actually the same question. First of all, I just want to say thank you, David, because I think your work is incredibly important. That's an understatement. And also what you said about the mainstream media being the enemy. So yeah, it's really the same question about how can we link up with you, because personally I have contacts with 2C TV, and I know that, for example, your work about the BBC was covered through JTV, and JTV also worked with Maya 2C, as does of last week Emily Schrader, and he's actually about to go for a couple of weeks for a trip to Israel. So I'd love to be able to help out in the way I can with my own contacts and being able to remind people of things. And yeah, I think if we can all, you know, go and use our contacts and our allies and all the people, we need to all stand together, not just us, but all the communities against this horror who want to fight our values and our freedoms.
Thank you, Leah.
Right.
David.
Leah, happy to give you an email address or WhatsApp or whatever. I mean, that's no problem. If that can be organized by the people running this event, that would be fantastic. Yeah, look, one of the things that I think it's important to understand, and I'm going to use Corbyn here as the perfect example. Corbyn did not lose the election in 2019 because of anti-Semitism. He lost the election in 2019 because the majority of British people saw this Marxist, IRA-loving, hard left activist and rejected him. Anti-Semitism was part of our struggle against Corbyn, but that's not why he lost the election. We're in a position where we have so many people out there that agree with us, but may not be standing there and talking about the fact they may not have any interest in Israel, but they'll be allies with us if they believe their churches are about to be attacked. They'll be allies with us if they believe that their children are going to start getting some kind of ideology shoved down their throat at school. These people are allies that we're not actually connecting with, and we should do. The whole conversation doesn't have to be about Israel, just the same as the conversation about Corbyn didn't have to be about anti-Semitism. We can find allies because we are sitting here fighting for common values that basically the vast majority of British people would support. And with that, we'll end up getting protection for the state of Israel as well.
Thank you, David. Caroline Jeffer, you haven't asked a question yet, so over to you. Could you unmute, please? Caroline?
Yes, hello. I just wanted to ask whether the problem of not having independent journalists in or around Gaza allows the BBC to continue to allows other journalists to just fill the vacuum and make up their own stories, or they go to Hamas journalists, and we all know they're not all journalists, and get information from them and use it in that way. I'm just curious as to whether you think there is a vacuum that is filled by not having independent journalists allowed to be there.
Thanks.
Okay.
David.
All right. If you say something that Hamas doesn't like, they will kill you. It's that simple. If you are a journalist, if you're wearing a press jacket and you say something, there are probably more journalists, and I use that really heavily in these quoted, more journalists in Gaza per square kilometre than anywhere else on earth. And yet, over the last, 17 or 18 months, not one of them at any point gave a scoop about the hostages or found a tunnel or showed where the rockets were being fired. Not one of them did anything but say exactly what Hamas wanted them to say. Not one.
I was talking about the BBC.
I get that.
Yeah,
I get that. Right. I get that. Hamas has total editorial control over everything inside the Gaza Strip. Now, when this war broke out, one of the things that the BBC are not telling you is they had a team there. The BBC had several journalists inside Gaza when this broke out. They were standing there when the reporting about the Al-Ali hospital tried to blame Israel rather than the Islamic Jihad rocket. It didn't help at all. And the BBC flew these people out for their own safety. Okay, they flew them out for their own safety. So what the BBC is doing now, it's making up a story. It's basically trying to pretend that, oh, if only we had journalists in Gaza, our reporting would be much better, and therefore it's the Israelis' fault. You know, they're blaming Israel again. It's the Israelis' fault that they haven't let us in. Or you could turn around and say, well, why did you fly them out? Another point, when we fought Iraq, the British, the BBC didn't put journalists on the front line with Saddam Hussein's forces. When the civil war took place in Syria, the BBC didn't put people on the front line with Assad's forces. So the BBC wouldn't put journalists on the front line with Hamas. They wouldn't be there, would they? Because it's too dangerous, because Hamas are being targeted by the Israelis. So what are the BBC actually saying? What the BBC are saying is, why don't you let us put people behind the lines to stand amongst the Palestinian population, the civilians, who can put on a pantomime show for us, and then we can report firsthand exactly what these people are. There's no news there. So the entire, honestly, the BBC story doesn't hold up to anything. It's just typical BBC propaganda that tries to blame Israel for something because the BBC like to blame Israel for everything. I hope that answers the question.
David. Thanks, David.
Wow, thank you.
The last question, Nicholas Lazarus. Nicholas.
Thank you for allowing me to ask another question. Hello, David.
Hello.
Just a very simple question. Is BBC Verify a sham?
Oh, I'm pleased that's a question. Oh, you got it. Yes.
Great for the last question of the night, David.
No, firstly, great. Firstly, the BBC, something interesting. You can ask, what is BBC Verify about? Because if the BBC are not verifying all of their articles, so much so that they need to create something called BBC Verify, then we have a problem. Because surely every article that the BBC write has some level of verification. Secondly, look, and I caught the BBC Verify at it as well. This one with the documentary is just the end of a long line. And what's unique about the documentary, and there is something unique about it, is that there is a new supply chain, right? The supply chain starts with Hamas or Islamic Jihad propaganda offices in Gaza. It then gets handed to those flood of all those people wearing press jackets, you know, that's the next stage. It then moves to the fixers and the middlemen that are working with Arab-speaking journalists like BBC Arabic, Sky News Arabic, and these kind of journalists, who then hand the news over to English-speaking journalists in London who don't know the first thing about Gazan culture, Gazan, life, or speak Arabic at all, and they just basically write down whatever it is that Hamas told the people in the beginning. That's the way that the news unfolds. BBC Verify are just sitting in an office in London, checking information, well, yes, but they're checking, what can they do? They can't actually fly in and say, excuse me, Hamas, we just want to come here and verify exactly what took place. No, they're just picking up the same information that everybody else is and using that to pretend that they know what is happening. And one other point I'm going to make that I haven't actually discussed that's really important. Have I got time?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Because I'm on a roll now, so I apologize to everyone. I can just keep going for ages. But anyway, BBC in Jerusalem have a single office. That's it. They have one office in Jerusalem. Inside that office sits the BBC, BBC World, BBC Arabic, BBC Persia, BBC Middle East. They all sit in a single office. Now imagine for a second that you were a journalist and you go and I'm pro-Israeli, I want to go, I'm not even pro-Israeli, I'm unbiased. I want to go and tell the truth. And you get sent as a correspondent to Jerusalem. You turn up in Jerusalem in this little office and there's all these people there, probably about 80% of them are Arabic, okay? And you say, right, what do I do? Somebody stands up and says, oh, well, it's very simple. Look, I'm going to help you. Here's a little book. Inside this book are these numbers. These people will help you the most. And you're done. You're lost. From the very moment you walk in, you don't have control. They do. And you don't speak Arabic. So when you want to speak to someone, you say, oh, please get me someone to interview. You're handing that, you're delegating that to BBC Arabic. When you say, look, find me someone in Gaza, I need to, you're handing that to BBC Arabic. So the BBC articles, even when the byline is by a British journalist, even when the byline is by some white guy who's sitting in London, BBC Arabic DNA is in every single article that is written on Israel and Gaza. And we're being conned, actually conned by the BBC, who are pretending that is not the case.
Thank you so much, David. Can I now ask Lawrence Julius, our Vice Chairman, to propose a vote of thanks to you? Lawrence.
Hi, David. Thank you
Hi,
again.
Lawrence.
How are you doing?
All good. How are you?
Fine. Just keep up the excellent work is all I can say. And I look forward to the next expose on the BBC next week.
No pressure. No pressure
No
at all.
pressure at all. I've got there's the odd one today. Do you ever deal in? I know it's not really subject to the talk. There's an impact report has come up on the PA education program today. I don't know if you've seen that. That it's no, the PA education piece is no better or worse than it was before. Is that in?
Well, are you surprised?
Is that something which you could comment on? Because people read your comments and you could influence perhaps people to stop the funding.
Look, it's something
that your top talk today. Just I literally got this 5 minutes ago. So.
No. Look, it's we have issues. My problem is that I see the Palestinian identity for what it is. I see Palestinianism for what it is. I see the conflict for what it is. And my problem is because when I talk, I kind of leave people behind because they're still, I don't know, sitting in some utopian bubble that thinks that if Israel were just nicer to the Palestinians, or maybe the Palestinians will settle for anything other than the complete destruction of Israel, they believe all of this. So I have trouble reaching them because what you're talking about is basically an exposing the reality of the conflict. And that is that the Palestinians and the Palestinian identity was created solely for one purpose. The Palestinians exist to try to help destroy the state of Israel and get the Jews out of the Middle East. That's the only reason that the Palestinian identity was created, the only reason the conflict was perpetuated. It has no reason to exist. This conflict should, if it wasn't for that, this conflict would have ended in 1949. Yep. It didn't, because they're not interested in peace. They're not interested in Israel. They won't change because they can't change. They can't improve the educational material because they've got no intention of changing the educational material. They want to teach their children to be terrorists because they need them to be terrorists in order to perpetuate the conflict, which is the sole reason the Palestinian identity exists. So yes, I can say something.
I agree with you. If we send it out from the NJA with one of our press releases, it will get an audience of X. If you put it on one of your posts, you'll get an audience of 100X. And real
okay, I will. If you can, you send me the link so I know exactly what we're talking about, and I will see, because I understand I'm at the moment swamped and it's a tsunami. There's another BBC article coming out tomorrow morning on the Hezbollah. There was one today, obviously, on the medics. It's relentless, but I promise you, because it's really important, I promise you I will try to get that addressed.
Well, keep up the excellent work. And I know David didn't ask for this. David does sort of He is reliant. He does everything voluntarily, and he does have a page looking for donations. If anyone wants to give a donation, if you send the link to NJA, we will share it with people so that people can make a donation to support you. It's
Lauren,
voluntary.
thank you ever so much. Yes, please, that would be good if we could support David. David, can I just re-echo Lawrence's thanks to you and thanks from everyone, and just to say to everyone, have a wonderful rest of the evening and see you at our next meeting. Hopefully, maybe even tomorrow night. Good night.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Talk.
Thanks.
Good night.